If you're ready to wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not ready, you're going to stay pretending that you're just a poor little me. And since you all here and engaged in this sort of inquiry and listening to this sort of lecture, I assume that you're all on the process of waking up. Or else you're teasing yourselves with some kind of flirtation with waking up, which you're not serious about. But I assume maybe you are not serious, but sincere that you are ready to wake up. So then, when you're in the way of waking up and finding out who you really are, what you do is what the whole universe is doing at the place you call here and now. You are something the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real, deep down you is the whole universe. We can't describe a human being without also describing their environment. You can't say what a person is doing without also saying what the world around them is doing. Now, just imagine for a moment, you couldn't see anything up here except me. No curtains behind me, no stage, no microphone, only me. You could only see me. That was all you could see. What would you be looking at? You wouldn't really be seeing me at all, because you wouldn't see my edges. And my edges are rather important. They define the shape of me. But those edges would be exactly where your eyesight ends. And to truly see me, you need to see what surrounds me. And there lies a clue of which we are mostly ignorant. You see, once you begin to realize that you can't exist apart from the world around you, that your very edges are shaped by everything you're not, a deeper question begins to stir. If I'm not just this body, and I'm not just this name, then who or what am I really? And this is where the game begins. And so, because you're playing hide and seek, even though you can't or won't admit it, you are intentionally forgetting who you truly are, what you actually are, and the understanding that your essential self is the very root of the universe. What the philosophers call the ground of being is something you carry, as the Germans say, as a Hintergedanke. A Hintergedanke is a thought tucked way, way, way back in your mind, somewhere far in the background, a truth you feel deep inside, but just can't quite face. So then, in a way, in order for that to rise to the surface, in order for you to know that it's true, you have to be shaken out of your own game. Now, the issue is this. In our experience, we make a distinction between what we do and what happens to us. There are certain actions we label voluntary. We feel in charge of those, but set against that are all the things we consider involuntary. Yet that dividing line between the two, it's actually quite arbitrary. Take this, for example. When you move your hand, you believe you're choosing to open it or to close it. But then ask yourself, how do you choose? When you decide to open your hand, do you first choose to make the decision? You don't, do you? You simply decide. But how exactly do you do that? And if you don't know how you do it, is it voluntary or involuntary? Take breathing, for instance. You can sense that you're breathing on purpose, that you can control it. But when you stop paying attention, it continues on its own. So, is that voluntary or involuntary? We end up with a very arbitrary sense of what we call the self. We say, this part of my activity, that's what I do. But that doesn't usually include breathing, not most of the time. It doesn't include your heartbeat. It doesn't include the work of the glands or the process of digestion. It doesn't include how your bones grow or how your blood flows. Are you doing those things, or are you not? Now, when you begin to truly be with yourself and recognize that you are all of yourself, something quite strange begins to unfold. You realize that your body already knows. You're one with the universe. In other words, what you call the involuntary flow of your blood is happening in the same rhythm as the shining of the stars. And the instant you see that you are the one circulating your blood, you'll also see that you, in just the same way, are shining the sun. Because this body of yours isn't something apart from the rest of it all. It's moving right along with everything else, just as waves move with the sea. Your body is inseparable from the whole energy field of the cosmos, and it's all you. Only you're playing the game, the journey, the spit over. But as I try to explain, there are in physical reality no such things as separate events. So then remember also when I tried to work towards the definition of omnipotence. Omnipotence is not knowing how everything is done. It's just doing it. You don't have to translate it into language. Look, supposing when you got up in the morning, you had to switch your brain on, and you have to think and do as a deliberate process, waking up all the circuits that you need for active life during the day. Why you never get done? Because you have to do all those things at once. How can a centipede control 100 legs at once? Because it doesn't think about it. And so in the same way, you are unconsciously performing all the various activities of your organisms. Because what a consciousness is simply a sort of specialized form of awareness. When you look around the room, you are conscious of as much as you can notice. And you see an enormous number of things which you don't notice. It's, for example, I look at a girl here, and somebody asked me later, what was she wearing? I may not know, although I've seen, because I didn't attend, that I was aware. You see? And perhaps, if I could under hypnosis be asked this question, well, I would get my conscious attention out of the way. Through being in the hypnotic state, I could recall what dress she was wearing. So then, just in the same way as you don't, focus your attention on how you make your thyroid gland function. So, in the same way, you don't have any attention focused on how you shine the sun. So then, let me tie this into the whole mystery of birth and death, which understandably baffles people immensely. Because if you're going to understand what the self really is, you have to see that it doesn't need to remember anything. Just as you don't need to know how you manage your thyroid gland, it simply happens. So then, when you die, you won't have to endure some kind of eternal non-existence. That's not something you experience. A lot of people are frightened by the idea that when they die, they'll be trapped in some endless blackness, locked away in a dark void forever. But here's where it gets interesting. This is the essence of yoga, of inner realization. Try to imagine what it would be like to fall asleep and never wake up. Just really sit with that. Children even wonder about this. It's one of life's profound questions. What would it be like to go to sleep and never wake again? Now, if you let yourself truly consider that, something begins to shift, because that question flips itself around and asks you, what was it like to wake up after never having gone to sleep? That was when you were born. You see, you can't have an experience of nothing. Nature doesn't allow for a vacuum in experience. So after death, the only thing that can happen is the same kind of event as birth. In other words, we all understand quite well that after people die, other people are born. And they're all you, only you could only experience it one at a time. Everybody is I, and wheresoever beings exist throughout all galaxies, it doesn't make any difference. You are all of them, and when they come into being, that's you coming into being. You know that very well. Only, you don't have to remember the past. In the same way, you don't have to think about how you work your thyroid gland, or whatever else it is in your organism. You don't have to know how to shine the sun. You just do it, like you breathe. Doesn't it really astonish you that you are the fantastically complex thing, and that you're doing all of this, and you never had any education in how to do it? You never learned to pursue this miracle. Well, the point is that from a strictly physical, scientific standpoint, this organism is a continuous energy with everything else that's going on. And if I am my foot, then I am the sun. Only we're stuck in this narrow perspective, this limited point of view that says, no, I'm just this thing inside the body, the ego. But that's the joke. The ego is nothing more than the spotlight of conscious attention. It's like the radar on a ship. The radar's job is to scan the surroundings, look for obstacles, detect danger. It's a trouble detector. In the same way, conscious attention is a function of the brain that scans the environment, searching for anything unusual or threatening. But when you start to identify with the radar, when you mistake that tiny scanning mechanism for you, then of course you end up feeling like you're constantly in danger, always in a state of tension, of anxiety. But the moment you stop identifying with the ego and begin to realize that you are the whole organism, if you realize that the first thing, how harmonious it all is, because your organism is a miracle of harmony, all this thing functioning together, even those copper schools and creatures that are fighting each other in the bloodstream and eating each other up. If they weren't doing that, you wouldn't be healthy. So what is discord at one level of your being is harmony at a higher level. And you begin to realize that, and you begin to be aware too, that the discords of your life, the discourse of people's life, which are a fight at one level, at a higher level of the universe, are healthy and harmonious. And you suddenly realize that everything that you are and do is at that level as magnificent and as free of any blemish, as the patterns in waves, the markings in marble, the way a cat moves, and that this world is really okay and can't be anything else because otherwise it couldn't exist. But the reality underneath physical existence, or which really is physical existence, because in my philosophy, there's no difference between the physical and the spiritual. These are absolutely out-of-date categories. It's all process. It isn't stuff on the one hand and form on the other. It is pattern. Life is pattern. It is a dance of energy. So I will never invoke spooky knowledge, that is to say that I've had a private revelation, or that I have sensory vibrations going on a plane, which you don't have. Everything is standing right out in the open. It's just the question of how you look at it. So you do discover, when you realize this, the most extraordinary thing to me, that I never cease to be flabbergasted about whenever it happens to me. So some people will use a symbolism of the relationship of God to the universe, where in God is a brilliant light, only somehow veiled, hiding underneath all these forms, that you see as you look around you. So far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. And it is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now. The very experience you're having, this ordinary, everyday awareness, in which you pretend you're not it, that is the light. It's no different at all. And when you finally see it, you laugh yourself silly. That's the great discovery.
Isn't it extraordinary that the one thing you can never lose is the very thing you believe you've lost? This seamless unity of existence, this boundless wholeness of being, is not something distant or separate from you. It is you. Yet through what might be the most magnificent magic trick in the cosmos, you've managed to convince yourself otherwise. I find it rather fascinating that a fish could be thirsty, that a wave could feel isolated from the ocean, that you, this marvelous expression of the universe itself, could believe you stand apart from it all. What an exquisite paradox. We're about to explore something that cannot truly be explained, only recognized. Not a new idea to add to your collection, but a fundamental reality that's been obscured by ideas themselves. Not a distant truth to be achieved, but an immediate presence to be acknowledged. I'm not here to give you something you don't already have. I'm here to point to what you've always been. Let us journey together into this forgotten unity, this overlooked wholeness that hides in plain sight as the very substance of your being. The great amnesia, as I like to call it, is the most fascinating game we've ever played with ourselves. You were born knowing your connection to everything, yet somehow along the way you were gradually hypnotized into believing that you are a separate self. Look at a newborn child. Does it know where it ends and where mother begins? Of course not. 0. 5. There's no separation there. But then we start the training, don't we? This is you that is not you. This is yours that is not yours. And the amnesia begins. What if I told you that this process of forgetting is actually built into the very fabric of the universe? That it's not a mistake, but rather a necessary prerequisite for the cosmic game to unfold? For how could the infinite know itself without first forgetting itself? You see, we are not unlike the sun, which cannot see its own light. The eye cannot see itself. The hand cannot grasp itself. And so the universe, this unified field of being, cannot know itself without creating the illusion of separation, without creating you and me. And so we walk around with this peculiar amnesia, bumping into each other, fighting wars, falling in love, all the while completely oblivious to the fact that we are playing hide and seek with ourselves. Isn't that rather marvelous? The illusion of separation is perhaps the most pervasive and destructive game we humans play. And what a curious game it is. Here we are, manifestations of a universe billions of years in the making, composed of the very same star stuff as everything around us, and yet we've convinced ourselves that we stand apart from it all. You see, the separate self, what we call the ego, is actually a social institution. It's not a physical thing any more than a nation's border is a physical thing. It's a convention, a tacit agreement, a useful fiction. And as with all social institutions, we're taught to believe in it so thoroughly that we mistake it for reality itself. What happens when you ask yourself, who am I? Most people immediately identify with their name, their history, their relationships, their job. But are you merely a collection of memories and social roles? Is that all you are? Let's look more carefully. If you observe your body, you'll notice that it doesn't end at your skin. It's constantly exchanging molecules with the environment, breathing air, absorbing nutrients, giving off heat. The line between you and not you is perpetually blurred. And what of your thoughts? Do you create them, or do they simply arise? If you watch carefully, you'll notice they appear much like the weather patterns of energy that form and dissolve of their own accord. The thinker, that voice claiming ownership of thoughts, is itself just another thought. This illusion of separation is the root of our existential anxiety. We feel isolated, alienated, cut off from the whole. And from this fundamental misunderstanding springs our desperate attempt to protect and promote this fictional self, leading to conflict, greed, and suffering. But the truth is far more marvelous. You are not merely connected to the universe, you are the universe, experiencing itself through the temporary form you currently inhabit. As I often say, you are not in the universe, you are the universe. The real you is not a passenger in a body, but the entire cosmic drama. The cosmic game of hide and seek is what this entire universe is all about. It's rather delightful when you think about it. The One, the unified field of being, the Godhead, whatever you wish to call it, plays this magnificent game of pretending to be many. Now, why would unity decide to manifest as multiplicity? For the same reason children play hide and seek, for the sheer delight of it, for the joy of losing and finding oneself. The Hindus call it Leela, divine play. Consider this, if you were God, if you were infinite consciousness, what would you do? Omnipotence and omniscience might get rather boring after a while, don't you think? So perhaps you'd play a game of limitation. You'd pretend to be finite, fragmented, separate. You'd divide yourself into seemingly discrete parts, each forgetting its true identity, each believing in its apparent isolation. And that's precisely what's happening here. The universe is not something that happened to you, it's something you're doing. Right now. Only you've developed a form of cosmic amnesia. You've forgotten that you're it. This game requires that you forget who you really are. Otherwise, there's no game at all. Just as an actor must temporarily forget she's not actually Lady Macbeth, you must forget you're not actually John Smith or Mary Jones. The forgetting is essential to the play. But here's the marvelous twist. At some point in the game, you get a chance to remember. There's that moment of aha, when you realize it was you all along. When you see through the veil of separation and recognize your true identity. And that's what we call enlightenment, awakening, or simply coming home to yourself. Isn't it extraordinary? The whole universe, stars, planets, mountains, oceans, plants, animals, humans, is the One playing at being many. Its consciousness having the adventure of forgetting itself so that it can have the delight of remembering. It's the ultimate game of hide and seek, played on a cosmic scale. And you, my friend, are it. You've always been it. You've just forgotten. Let's consider the ocean and its waves. When you look at the ocean, you see waves rising and falling on its surface. Each wave appears to be a separate entity. It has its own form, its own movement, its own beginning and end. But is a wave really separate from the ocean? Of course not. The wave is a pattern of movement within the ocean. It has no existence apart from the ocean. It is not made of something different from the ocean. It is the ocean temporarily taking a particular shape. And this, my friends, is precisely your relationship to the universe. You are not a separate entity existing in the universe. You are the universe, temporarily taking the shape of a human being. Just as a wave is not in the ocean but of the ocean, you are not in the cosmos but of the cosmos. Now, imagine a wave suddenly developing self-consciousness. It might look around at the other waves and think, look at me, I'm a wave, I'm different from all those other waves. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Some are more powerful, some more graceful. I must compete with them. I must survive longer than them. Wouldn't that be a peculiar situation? The wave, completely ignorant of its true nature as water, believes itself to be a separate thing called a wave with a life problem to solve. It doesn't recognize that its very substance is identical to that of every other wave. It doesn't understand that its apparent birth and death are merely changes in form, not in essence. This is your predicament. You've forgotten that you're the water, not just the wave. You identify exclusively with your temporary form and lose sight of your eternal substance. You believe that you end at your skin, that you're separate from everything else, that you're in the world rather than of it. And so we have this magnificent paradox. You are simultaneously a unique individual wave, with your own distinct pattern and expression, and also the entire ocean, without division or separation. Both perspectives are true. The art of living wisely is to embrace both, to honor your individuality while recognizing your universality. Remember, when a wave returns to the ocean, nothing of its essence is lost. It simply returns to what it always was. And so it is with you. Time, what a curious prison we've built for ourselves. We've taken the seamless flow of existence and chopped it into past, present, and future. We've sliced the eternal now into seconds, minutes, hours, days, years. And then, remarkably, we've convinced ourselves that this mental abstraction is more real than reality itself. Have you ever noticed that you never experience the past directly? You only experience memories, and those memories exist now. Similarly, you never experience the future directly. You only experience anticipations, and those anticipations exist now. In fact, the only time you ever experience anything is now. Now is the only time there is. Yet we spend our lives mentally dwelling in a past that no longer exists, or anxiously projecting into a future that doesn't exist yet, and thereby miss the only reality we ever have, this present moment. It's rather like someone so busy taking photographs of a beautiful sunset that they never actually look at the sunset itself. This fragmentation of time reinforces our sense of being separate selves. The me of yesterday and the me of tomorrow seem to create a continuous entity moving through time. But upon closer inspection, this continuity is just another mental abstraction. The you of 5 years ago shares almost nothing with the you of today. Different cells, different thoughts, different memories. The truth is that you don't exist in time, time exists in you. The eternal present is the space in which all times unfold. When you step out of psychological time and fully enter the now, you also step out of the limited self and into the unlimited self. You discover that your true identity is timeless awareness, not a time-bound entity. This is why all mystical traditions emphasize presence, mindfulness, the eternal now. It's not just a nice psychological technique, it's a doorway out of the prison of the separate self and into the freedom of your true nature. In this timeless now, the unity that you've forgotten reveals itself. When past and future dissolve, so too does the boundary between me and not me. Without time, there can be no separation. There is only this, the undivided wholeness of being, expressing itself as the infinitely varied forms of the present moment. Have you ever noticed the space between your thoughts? Most people haven't. We're so captivated by the content of our thinking, the endless internal monologue, the images, the emotions that thoughts trigger, that we completely overlook the gaps between them. It's rather like being so fixated on the notes of a piece of music that we fail to appreciate the silence between the notes, without which there would be no music at all. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice that thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness. They come, they linger a while, and they go. And between these clouds of thought are spaces, moments of pure, silent awareness. These spaces may be brief, perhaps just a fraction of a second, but they are there. And what is in that space? Not thoughts about unity, not concepts of oneness, not ideas about your true nature, but unity itself. Direct, immediate, non-conceptual awareness. The unity that you've forgotten is not found by thinking about it, but by falling into the gaps between thoughts. This is why meditation is not about achieving some special state or having profound spiritual experiences. It's simply about becoming aware of the space that's already there. It's about shifting your attention from the content of consciousness to consciousness itself. From the movie playing on the screen to the screen itself. Most of us are so identified with our thoughts that we believe we are our thoughts. I think, therefore I am, said Descartes, and we've taken this backwards logic to heart. But who is aware of thinking? Who is the witness of thoughts? That witnessing presence, that field of awareness in which thoughts arise and dissolve, that is who you really are. And remarkably, when you rest in that space between thoughts, you discover that it's not just your personal awareness. It's universal awareness. The same consciousness that looks out through your eyes looks out through mine and through the eyes of every sentient being. In that space there is no division, no separation. There is only one awareness, appearing as many. This is why the great Zen master Huangpo said, "All the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind." Not similar minds, not connected minds, but the one mind. Your true nature is not a personal consciousness that somehow needs to connect with the universal. It is the universal, temporarily appearing as the personal. So if you want to rediscover the unity that you've forgotten, don't seek it in books or concepts or even in my words. Look for it in the space between your thoughts. It's always been there, waiting to be recognized. What do we really mean when we say I and you? We think these pronouns refer to separate entities, distinct beings existing in isolation from one another. But is that really the case? Let's look more closely. When you say I, you're generally referring to your body-mind complex, this organism with its particular history, characteristics, and boundaries. When you say you, you're referring to another such organism, and between these two supposedly separate entities lies a vast gulf of otherness. Or so it seems. But where exactly does I end and you begin? Is it at the skin? But your skin is constantly exchanging molecules with the environment. Is it at the boundary of your thoughts? But your thoughts are conditioned by language, culture, education, all of which come from others. Is it at the edge of your influence? But your actions ripple outward, affecting countless beings in ways you can never fully track. The truth is that the boundary between I and you is entirely arbitrary. It's a convenient fiction, useful for practical purposes, but not an absolute reality. It's like drawing a line in the sand and declaring this side is America, that side is Mexico. The line serves a purpose, but from the perspective of the earth itself, there is no line. In the deepest sense, what we call I is not separate from what we call you. We are like different whirlpools in the same river. Distinct patterns, yes, but made of the same flowing substance. Or as the Upanishads put it, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. The self in me is the self in you. This is not merely a poetic metaphor. It's the literal truth of our existence. The consciousness that knows your experience is the same consciousness that knows mine. There aren't multiple awarenesses, there is only awareness, appearing as multiplicity. When you truly realize this, something remarkable happens. Compassion ceases to be a moral duty and becomes a natural expression of your understanding. You care for others not because you should, but because at the deepest level they are not others at all. Love becomes, as the mystics have always claimed, the recognition of unity. So beyond I and you lies a far more truthful reality, the seamless unity of being, expressing itself through seemingly separate forms, like one light shining through many windows. And in that recognition, the unity that you've forgotten reveals itself once more. Life presents itself to us as a dance of opposites. Light and dark, pleasure and pain, life and death, self and other, these dualities seem to structure our entire experience. And because we perceive them as fundamentally separate, even antagonistic, we find ourselves caught in an endless struggle. We cling to one pole while trying to avoid its opposite. We want pleasure without pain, life without death, self without other. But what if these apparent opposites are not truly opposed? What if they are more like the north and south poles of a single magnet, seemingly opposite, yet entirely inseparable? What if duality itself is a form of hidden unity? Consider the simple act of breathing. Inhalation and exhalation appear to be opposite movements, yet they are aspects of a single process. You cannot have one without the other. They are not enemies but partners in the dance of respiration. Or think about buying and selling. They seem like opposite activities, yet every purchase is simultaneously a sale, and every sale is simultaneously a purchase. They are the same transaction, viewed from different perspectives. This principle extends to all the dualities we experience. Light and dark are not separate forces, but different points on a spectrum of luminosity. Pleasure and pain are not distinct sensations, but varying intensities of feeling. Life and death are not opposed states, but phases in the cycle of transformation. And most fundamentally, self and other, I and not I, are not separate entities, but aspects of a unified field of being. Just as a coin has two faces but is one coin, reality has many facets but is one reality. The Chinese understood this beautifully with their concept of yin and yang. These forces are not at war, they are in love. They complement, balance, and interpenetrate each other. Each contains the seed of its opposite, and together they form a dynamic whole. When you recognize the unity underlying apparent duality, you're freed from the exhausting effort to embrace one side of life while rejecting the other. You can relax into the totality of experience. You can dance with duality rather than being torn apart by it. And in that dance you rediscover the unity that you've forgotten, not by escaping duality, but by seeing through it to its source. Not by transcending the world of form, but by perceiving the formless within all forms. Not by rejecting multiplicity, but by recognizing it as the play of unity. We tend to think of our bodies as rather small, limited things, these fleshy vessels that contain us and separate us from the rest of the world. But I want to suggest a far more marvelous possibility. Your body is not a tiny fragment of the universe. It is the entire universe expressed from a particular point of view. Consider what your body actually is. It's composed of elements forged in the hearts of ancient stars. The carbon, calcium, iron in your cells were once scattered across vast nebulae before gravity gathered them into our sun and planets. Your body is literally made of stardust. And these elements aren't static. They're constantly flowing through you. The water in your cells was once in clouds, oceans, rivers, and countless other organisms. The air you breathe connects you to all breathing beings. We all share the same atmosphere, passing oxygen molecules back and forth between us. Even more remarkably, your body extends beyond its apparent boundaries through its relationships with everything else. Your eyes reach to the stars, or rather, the stars extend to your eyes through the medium of light. Your ears extend to all sounds, your skin to all it touches. These aren't poetic metaphors, but literal descriptions of how your senses function. When you truly understand this, you realize that your body doesn't end at your skin. It extends outward to include everything you perceive and interact with. As the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty put it, the body is our vehicle of being in the world. It's not a sealed container, but an open system, constantly exchanging substance and energy with its environment. This is why the yogis of India speak of the universe as the cosmic body, and the individual body as a microcosm of that greater whole. They're not being mystical, they're being literal. Your body is a localized expression of the universe's body. Your consciousness is a localized expression of the universe's consciousness. And so, when you feel the weight of your feet on the ground, that's the earth feeling itself. When you gaze at the night sky, that's the universe admiring itself. When you breathe, that's the cosmos breathing. The unity that you've forgotten is not an abstract metaphysical concept, it's the concrete reality of your embodied existence. Your body is not a prison separating you from the world, it's a bridge connecting you to it. Or rather, it's the world itself, experienced from a unique perspective. You are not in the universe, you are the universe bodying itself as you. What if I told you that enlightenment, that state of perfect unity, which spiritual seekers pursue so earnestly, is not something to be achieved in the future, but the very reality of what you are right now? What if the unity you've forgotten is not truly forgotten, but merely overlooked, like a pair of glasses resting on your nose while you search frantically for them around the house? This is the great cosmic joke. You cannot become what you already are. You cannot attain what you never lost. You cannot connect with the unity from which you were never separated. The search itself perpetuates the illusion of separation. The Zen masters understood this beautifully. When the student asked, "How long will it take me to attain enlightenment?" the master replied, "As long as it takes you to see that it's already here." Another master, when asked about the nature of enlightenment, simply held up a finger, pointing directly at reality as it is, without embellishment or abstraction. You see, we've been conditioned to believe that spiritual awakening is a dramatic transformation, a radical shift from one state to another. But it's more like a subtle recognition of what has always been the case. It's not about becoming something new, but about seeing through the fiction of the separate self to the unity that has never been absent, zero. 5. In his heart of hearts, no one actually experiences themselves as a separate ego. That's merely a concept, a social convention, a useful fiction for navigating the world. Your direct, immediate experience is always one of seamless unity. There is simply this life happening, experience unfolding, reality presenting itself in ever-changing forms. Awakening is not the attainment of unity, but the recognition that unity is all there is and ever has been. It's seeing that the separate self, which seems so solid and real, is actually transparent, like a soap bubble floating in the sun. Beautiful in its way, but insubstantial. A pattern, not a thing. And here's the wonderful paradox. This recognition doesn't diminish your individuality, it enhances it. Just as understanding that a wave is one with the ocean doesn't flatten the wave but contextualizes it, seeing your oneness with all things doesn't erase your uniqueness but places it in proper perspective. You remain yourself, but a self understood as a verb rather than a noun, a process rather than an entity, a song rather than a singer. So, in this moment, right now, without changing anything, without achieving anything, without becoming anything other than what you already are, can you recognize the unity that you've never truly forgotten? Can you see that it's been here all along, the very substance and nature of your being? Can you awaken to what always has been? You know, it's rather amusing when you think about it. We spend our lives searching for something we never lost, striving to connect with a unity from which we were never separated. It's like a fish swimming frantically in search of water, or a bird desperately seeking air. What you're looking for is what's looking. This unity I've been speaking about, it's not some exotic state to be achieved through years of spiritual practice. It's not a distant goal waiting at the end of a long journey. It's the simple, immediate reality of your existence, here and now. It's what you are, not what you might become. The separate self, that anxious, isolated entity that seems to live inside your head, is a kind of conceptual mirage, a case of mistaken identity. Your true self is far more marvelous. It's the entire universe experiencing itself through the unique perspective that you call me. You are not a tiny fragment of the cosmos. You are the whole thing, not metaphorically, but literally. And when you recognize this, not just intellectually, but in your bones, everything changes while remaining exactly the same. The world doesn't suddenly transform into a magical fairyland. Your problems don't instantly vanish, but they're no longer your problems in quite the same way. They're movements within the vast dance of existence, patterns in the cosmic tapestry. You still play your role, of course. You still brush your teeth and pay your taxes and feel the full range of human emotions. But you do so with a kind of cosmic humor, a divine lightness. You've seen through the drama to its source. You've remembered what you never really forgot, that you are not separate from the universe but a unique expression of its infinite creativity. So I leave you with this invitation. Rest in the unity that you've never truly lost. Allow yourself to be what you already are. Stop trying so hard to become enlightened and recognize the light that's already shining. For as the Zen saying goes, you are the Buddha you seek. And that, my friends, is the open secret at the heart of all existence. Have you ever considered that the person you were yesterday no longer exists? That in each moment some part of you is dying while another is being born? Most of us walk through life desperately clinging to the illusion that we are solid, continuous beings, unchanging islands in the river of time. But what if I told you that embracing your own continuous death might be the very key to truly living? You see, the most fascinating paradox I've discovered in my explorations of Eastern thought is this: those who learn to die while living are the ones who discover what it means to be fully alive. Today I invite you to join me in exploring this curious territory where death and rebirth dance together in the eternal now. We Westerners have developed the most extraordinary resistance to the notion of change. We build monuments meant to last forever, we embalm our dead, we create legal documents that attempt to control events long after we've gone. Isn't that a fascinating predicament? We live in a universe where the only constant is change, yet we exhaust ourselves fighting against this fundamental principle. Look at your own hand for a moment. It appears solid and unchanging, doesn't it? But any biologist will tell you that the cells comprising that hand are constantly dying and being replaced. The hand you possessed 7 years ago exists only in memory. Every atom has been exchanged. You are quite literally not the same person you were then. The Buddha called this anicca, impermanence, and suggested it wasn't something to mourn, but rather something to recognize and embrace. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus expressed a similar sentiment when he said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." What we call permanence is merely change happening at a pace too slow for our notice. Mountains are not permanent, they're rising and eroding simultaneously. Oceans are not fixed, their shorelines constantly reshape. And you, my dear friend, are not a fixed entity, but a process, a verb rather than a noun. Isn't it curious how much anxiety we create for ourselves by denying this obvious truth? We exhaust ourselves maintaining the fiction of an unchanging self, and then wonder why we feel so constricted, so afraid, so resistant to life itself. The Western mind typically conceives of death as an event that happens once at the end of life. But what if death isn't something awaiting us in the distant future, but rather something happening continuously, moment to moment? Consider this: the person who began reading these words is already gone. The thoughts you were thinking, the emotions you were feeling, the physical sensations in your body all have transformed. Subtle deaths are occurring within you constantly. In Zen monasteries, practitioners are sometimes asked to meditate on the question, what is your original face before you were born? This isn't merely a philosophical puzzle. It's an invitation to recognize that what you call myself is a series of temporary patterns rather than a fixed entity. The practice of dying daily isn't morbid, it's liberating. Each time you consciously release your grip on a particular configuration of your identity, you create space for something new to emerge. You allow yourself to flow with life rather than damming its natural current. I've often used this example. Imagine holding your breath. Initially it seems you're in control, but soon the tension builds, anxiety rises, and eventually you must surrender to the need to exhale. And in that surrender, that little death of control, comes the most exquisite relief. Life functions the same way. Our attempts to hold on, to maintain control, create suffering until we learn the art of letting go. So, have you died today? Have you allowed some identification, some fixed notion of yourself to dissolve? If not, you might be missing the extraordinary liberation that comes with this practice. Why do we resist this natural process of continuous death and rebirth? The answer lies in understanding the curious mechanism we call the ego. Your ego, that part of you that identifies as a separate self, is essentially a constellation of memories, habits, and patterns that has convinced itself it must survive at all costs. It's rather like a whirlpool in a stream, maintaining its pattern while the water constantly flows through it. The whirlpool appears to be a thing, but it's actually a process. This ego structure develops a fascinating survival technique. It creates the illusion of permanence and separateness. It tells itself, I am this but not that, I begin here and end there. I must continue existing in this exact form. And from this fundamental misunderstanding springs a tremendous fear, the fear that change means annihilation. But here's the marvelous joke. The ego is trying to protect something that doesn't exist in the way it thinks. It's like a child at the seashore frantically trying to protect a sandcastle from the incoming tide. The effort creates suffering, but the outcome is inevitable. When the ego senses change, whether it's aging, losing a job, ending a relationship, or simply shifting from one moment to the next, it often responds with terror. If I change, it reasons, then who am I? This question reveals the fundamental anxiety at the core of human suffering. But what if the question itself contains a false premise? What if your identity isn't something that needs defending, but rather a fluid, ever-changing expression of life itself? What if, like a skilled dancer, you could learn to move with these changes rather than resisting them? The ego fears death because it misunderstands what death is. It's not an end, but a transformation, not a period, but a comma in the unfolding sentence of existence. The Buddha identified attachment or clinging as the fundamental cause of suffering. This insight wasn't meant as a moral judgment, but as a practical observation about how consciousness operates. When we become attached to any particular state, possession, relationship, or identity, we create the conditions for suffering. Why? Because we're attaching ourselves to something impermanent while demanding it remain permanent. We're fighting against the basic nature of reality. Imagine clutching a handful of water. The tighter you squeeze, the more water escapes between your fingers. Yet we approach much of life with exactly this futile strategy. We clutch at pleasure, at youth, at success, at relationships, and then wonder why they seem to slip away despite our most determined efforts. I'm not suggesting we should never care about anything. That's not the point at all. Rather, I'm inviting you to consider the difference between appreciation and attachment. Appreciation flows with life, attachment fights against it. Appreciation says how wonderful that this exists now, attachment says this must not change. Even your most cherished beliefs and values, aren't they too subject to transformation? The opinions you held with such certainty a decade ago, haven't many of them evolved or even reversed? And isn't that evolution precisely what we might call growth? When we release our white-knuckled grip on what we think should be, we open ourselves to what is. And paradoxically, this release allows us to participate more fully in life, not less. Like a surfer who succeeds not by fighting the wave, but by entering into its motion, we can learn to move with the changing currents of existence. This is the subtle art of non-attachment, not a cold detachment from life, but a warm openness to its ever-changing nature. Zen masters have developed the most extraordinary techniques for helping us experience the liberation of letting go. Consider the koan, those seemingly nonsensical questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? These aren't meant to be solved intellectually. They're designed to exhaust the thinking mind until it surrenders its habitual patterns. When a Zen student sits with a koan, eventually reaching the limits of rational thought, something remarkable happens. There's a moment of cognitive surrender, a little death of the calculating, controlling mind, and in that space a different kind of knowing can emerge. The Japanese tea ceremony embodies this same principle. Each movement is performed with complete attention, with no goal beyond itself. The participants aren't trying to get the tea made as efficiently as possible. They're practicing the art of being fully present to each moment as it unfolds and then dies away. In Zen archery, the archer learns to release the arrow without trying to hit the target. This doesn't mean being careless. It means moving beyond the ego's grasping for results and entering a state where action flows naturally from presence. The paradox is that this kind of release often leads to greater accuracy than anxious aiming ever could. Each of these practices points to the same truth. Letting go isn't something you do once and are finished with. It's a continuous practice, a way of moving through life. And here's the secret that makes all the difference. True letting go isn't a tense, teeth-gritted exercise in renunciation. It's more like relaxing a cramped muscle, a release into greater ease. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki put it beautifully when he said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." This beginner's mind, this willingness to continuously die to what we think we know, is the gateway to wisdom. So I ask you, what might you be clutching that's ready to be released? What known territory could you allow to die so that some new understanding might be born? One of the most beautiful symbols in Eastern philosophy is the Taoist yin-yang, that circle divided into black and white teardrops, each containing a spot of the opposite color. This symbol isn't merely decorative. It represents a profound understanding of how reality functions. The dance between being and non-being isn't something happening in some abstract philosophical realm. It's occurring within you right now. Each inhalation is a birth, each exhalation a death. Each thought arises and then dissolves. Each moment of consciousness emerges from and returns to silence. The mistake we make is assuming that being is real and valuable, while non-being is empty and frightening. But consider, without the empty space inside a cup, the cup couldn't function. Without silence between notes, music would be mere noise. Without the gaps between thoughts, consciousness would be a meaningless blur. Non-being isn't the enemy of being, it's its necessary partner. Just as light needs darkness to be perceived, solid needs space, sound needs silence, life needs death. They're not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a single process. I often use the metaphor of the ocean and its waves. Each wave has a distinct form and movement. It appears to be a separate entity. But what happens when the wave crashes on the shore? Does it cease to exist? Or does it simply return to the ocean from which it temporarily arose? The death of the wave isn't an annihilation, but a return to source. Your thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and sense of self operate in the same way. They arise like waves from the ocean of consciousness, take form temporarily, and then dissolve back. Nothing is lost in this process, merely transformed. When we understand this dance between being and non-being, we can begin to relax our terror of death, not just the physical death that awaits us all, but the countless small deaths that constitute our moment-to-moment existence. We can recognize that emptiness isn't a void to be feared, but the fertile ground from which all form emerges. Our fear of death and our resistance to impermanence are intimately connected to our peculiar conception of time. We've convinced ourselves that time is a straight line running from past to future, with us trapped somewhere in the middle, being carried inexorably toward our end. No wonder we're anxious. But what if this linear model of time is merely a useful fiction rather than an accurate description of reality? What if, as Einstein suggested, the separation between past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion? 0. 5. Consider how we actually experience time. The past exists only as memory in the present moment. The future exists only as anticipation in the present moment. All we ever actually experience is now. This eternal now is where life actually happens. And yet we spend much of our lives mentally dwelling in a past that no longer exists, or anxiously projecting ourselves into a future that exists only in imagination. Meanwhile, the only moment in which we can actually live slips by unnoticed. The Zen tradition speaks of the timeless moment, not as some mystical state, but as the simple reality always available beneath our conceptual overlays. When you become fully present, whether through meditation, immersion in nature, creative flow, or deep intimacy, time as a linear construct falls away. You enter what might be called vertical time, the deep dimension of the now. In this vertical dimension, death and rebirth aren't separated by years, but occur simultaneously. The person you were a moment ago is already gone. The person you're becoming is already emerging. This isn't a philosophical abstraction, but the literal truth of your existence. When we shift from living horizontally across time to living vertically into its depth, the fear of death begins to dissolve. We recognize that we don't need to worry about dying in the future because we're already dying and being reborn in each instant. And rather than being frightening, this recognition becomes the doorway to the most profound aliveness. So how might one practice this art of dying while living? How do we transform an intellectual understanding of impermanence into a lived experience? First, we can practice noticing and releasing identification with our thoughts. Most of us are so entangled with our thinking that we don't even recognize it as just one activity of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. When a thought arises, can you watch it without becoming it? Can you allow it to pass through awareness like a cloud moving across the sky? We can apply this same gentle noticing to emotions. When anger, fear, or joy arises, can you experience it fully while recognizing it as a temporary weather pattern in consciousness rather than a fixed state? Can you allow each emotional state to die a natural death rather than clutching it or pushing it away? The practice extends to identification with roles and self-images. You play many parts in the theater of life: professional, parent, partner, friend, citizen. These roles are necessary and valuable, but they're not your fundamental identity. Can you wear them lightly, taking them up when appropriate and setting them down when not? Even our most cherished values and beliefs benefit from this practice of dying to fixed positions. Can you hold your convictions sincerely while remaining open to their evolution? Can you die to certainty and be reborn into curiosity? One of my favorite Zen sayings is, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This doesn't advocate literal violence. It suggests that even our highest spiritual concepts must be released if they become fixed objects of attachment rather than living truths. The irony of this practice is that what feels initially like dying, this releasing of fixed identity, reveals itself as the gateway to being more fully alive. When we're not defending a particular configuration of self, we become available to the ever-fresh emergence of now. We move from being a noun to being a verb, from a fixed entity to a flowing process. As we practice this continuous letting go, this willingness to die to each moment, something remarkable begins to happen. We discover a dimension of awareness that isn't subject to the coming and going of thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Various traditions have given this different names. Buddhists might call it Buddha nature. Hindus speak of Atman. Christian mystics have called it the divine ground of being. The terminology matters less than the experience itself, a recognition of that which witnesses the dance of change without itself changing. This isn't some abstract metaphysical concept, but something you can verify in your own experience. Right now, as you listen to my words, notice that there's an awareness within you that's noticing sounds, thoughts, and sensations. This noticing itself, has it ever changed? Or has it been the constant field within which all change occurs? Rebirth, through awareness, isn't about achieving some special state. It's about recognizing what's already true. Beneath the fluctuating surface of experience lies a dimension of consciousness that isn't born and doesn't die. It's not something to attain, but something to recognize. The Zen master, Huneng, expressed it beautifully. From the beginning, not a thing is. He wasn't suggesting that nothing exists, but rather pointing to the empty, open nature of awareness itself, the space within which all experience arises and passes away. When we touch this dimension of our being, the fear of death begins to dissolve. Not because we've constructed some comforting belief about afterlife, but because we've directly recognized that aspect of consciousness that doesn't come and go. We've discovered the deathless within the dying. This recognition doesn't remove the fact of physical death or the temporary nature of all forms, including our bodies and personalities, but it reveals a context that transforms our relationship with impermanence from one of fear to one of wonder. So we arrive at the beautiful paradox. It is precisely through embracing impermanence that we discover how to live fully. When we no longer waste our energy denying or resisting change, that energy becomes available for creative participation in life. Think of how a musician must let each note die to make way for the next. If she clutched at notes, refusing to release them, music would be impossible. The beauty of the melody depends on this continuous process of birth and death, sound and silence. Our lives are no different. When we understand impermanence not as an enemy, but as the very fabric of existence, we can begin to approach life with what Zen calls beginner's mind, that fresh, open quality of attention that experiences each moment as unique and unprecedented. We stop living from memory and projection and become available to what's actually happening. This understanding transforms our relationships. When we recognize that people, like everything else, are processes rather than fixed entities, we can stop trying to hold them in place. We can appreciate who they are now rather than who we think they should remain. We can allow them the dignity of their own unfolding. It transforms our relationship with nature. Rather than seeing ourselves as separate from the natural world, we recognize that we are nature temporary patterns in the flow of energy and matter that constitutes the universe. This recognition breeds not despair but reverence and a sense of intimate belonging. Even our relationship with suffering is transformed. When we understand that no state is permanent, we can endure difficulty with greater resilience. This too shall pass, becomes not just a platitude, but a lived understanding. And most profoundly, our relationship with joy is transformed. When we stop trying to cling to pleasurable states, to freeze and preserve them, we can appreciate them fully as they arise. The cherry blossom is beautiful precisely because it falls. The sunset is precious because it fades. Impermanence isn't the enemy of joy, but its necessary condition. So I ask you again, have you died today? Have you allowed some fixed notion of yourself to dissolve? Have you practiced the art of letting go, not as a solemn duty, but as the path to liberation? If not, perhaps today is the day to begin. Not because I tell you to, but because life itself is inviting you into this dance of continuous death and rebirth. It's inviting you to stop being a noun and start being a verb, to recognize yourself not as a fixed entity moving through time, but as a continuous process of unfolding. And in that recognition you may discover what the great mystical traditions have always pointed to, that what you are most fundamentally is not something that is born and dies, but the awareness within which birth and death are temporary patterns, like waves on the ocean of being. As our time together draws to a close, I invite you to pause and feel the truth of what we've explored, not as a concept to be filed away, but as a living reality happening within you right now. The breath that just left your body is gone forever. The thought you were thinking a moment ago has dissolved. The person who began listening to these words has already transformed. This isn't something to fear, it's something to celebrate. For in this continuous dance of letting go, you discover not loss but renewal, not diminishment but expansion. So perhaps the question isn't whether you'll die today, for surely you will, in countless subtle ways. The question is whether you'll notice it happening, whether you'll resist it or embrace it, whether you'll clutch fearfully at what's passing away or open yourself to what's being born. In the words of the Tao Te Ching, to die but not to perish is to be eternally present. May you discover this eternal presence in the midst of passing time. May you find, as I have, that what appears as death from one perspective is revealed as rebirth from another. And in that discovery, may you taste the extraordinary freedom that comes from dancing with impermanence rather than fighting against it. After all, the most miraculous thing about life isn't that it ends, but that it happens at all. And it's happening right now, through you, as you. What could be more wonderful than that?